guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. And today we are covering a couple different topics. We wanted to kind of quickly run through some things that we've seen pop up in the last couple days. So we're going to chat about the new nutrition label, which was actually talked about, or I guess implemented in 2016 or developed in 2016.
It was put into law in 2016. And then it's going to be...
Yes, finalized. Everybody has to be following it at the end of 2021.
Yeah,
correct?
Everybody.
So everybody should now be should be switching over to the new label at the end of 2021. We're also going to chat a little bit about a new research study that digs a little bit deeper into how your body processes carbs and maybe finding a new link to diabetes. And then talking about whether or not small meals, more frequent, are truly better for fat loss and the metabolism.
Yeah, so we got a few things to unpack today.
Yeah. So we'll start with the nutrition label, which I remember when this was starting to be talked about because it was after I had graduated and big food companies were freaking out about it. Not from the sense that they didn't want to divulge the information, I don't think. I think it was more of just the amount of labor that was about to go into all of this.
Yeah.
Which is why they were given this period of time to change everything over.
Right.
Which I think it was actually supposed to be, originally it was supposed to be 2019 that all the companies were supposed to switch over.
Was it?
I think, yeah, they've made changes in the last couple of years that have stretched that goal out a little bit. But what this means for the average consumer, the main difference in these new food labels is sugars. So giving the consumer more information about what sugars are naturally present in the food and then what sugars have been added to the food. How
relevant would you say that is?
I think I personally find it more relevant just because if we're talking about food quality and we're talking about focusing on whole foods, I think it gives people a better understanding of how much added sugar is really put into lots of processed foods and products, and even things that are touted as being more natural. So even things that are, that their marketing team has done a really great job and these foods are accepted as being healthy, those companies are still putting a bunch of added sugars and a bunch of, other things into their foods.
But marketing is truthful, right?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, it's just another level of being transparent with consumers, which I think is important. So whether or not this makes a huge difference for the average person or not, I think it's good that this is the way we're now trending, is to be more transparent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Between food companies and consumers.
More information is always better in my book when it comes to knowing what you're eating.
Yes.
And so the specifics of what is going to happen is there are a lot of different foods that have already made the transition to the new label. Because the way it works is that all companies that have more than $10 million in revenue have to have all of their nutrition labels updated and ready to go by the 1st of January in 2020. And then any companies making less than $10 million in revenue a year have till 2021. So they've got an extra year to get their stuff together. So right now you'll kind of see a mix of those two things. And so what you'll notice, like Alexa said, is that the new ones are going to include the added sugars in that carbohydrate row. And then you're also going to see newly updated values for sodium, macronutrient percentages, and cholesterol, as well as the actual amount of micronutrients. So as opposed to just saying 10% calcium RDA, it'll actually give you in grams or micrograms what that content is, which is nice to see as well.
I think it's nice to see, but I kind of find that change to be a little useless for the average person, because if you have nothing to compare it to, knowing a microgram amount doesn't really mean anything.
But see, I would say the exact opposite, because those percentages are going to only be compared to a 2,000 calorie diet, which is not most people.
Oh, definitely. Sure.
So now that you actually have the information, if you do have a target to actually shoot for, then you can know, okay, I've got X amount of this in here, and this is how much I need, versus oh, I hit 25% of some
Sure.
arbitrary caloric goal.
Sure. No, and I agree for that. And I would say that the people who are probably paying attention to their micronutrients are the people that these gram amounts would benefit.
Right.
So maybe that's like who they were targeting to begin with.
It's just more transparency overall.
Yeah, no, again, and that's what I like about it, is it is more transparent. So you mentioned an update in macro values. Did they change what the standard like calorie amount is that they're basing the percentages
No, I don't
off
think
of?
it was macro specifically. It was more just, I think it had more to do with sodium or cholesterol, or I didn't really look specifically at it. It was just kind of like a picture change of
Got it.
what was changing there.
Yeah. And they also have changed the look of the food labels. So they're making serving sizes and calories per serving more apparent.
Yeah.
Which, again, is good because I think sometimes that gets overlooked when people are looking at, you know, carbs or fats or calories, but they don't really ever look at how much of that package they're really supposed to be eating to add up to that.
Right. Well, and there's workarounds too. So like you can put 0 calories on a label for a food that doesn't have 0 calories, but because of the way that they've created the serving sizes and it's under the amount required to report based on the serving size, you can get away with a product that maybe has 50 or 100 calories in the total thing, saying that it's 0 calories.
Yeah.
And then suddenly somebody has 5 of them in a day, and that's an extra 500 calories.
Yeah.
So
that you weren't aware
things
of.
to pay attention to. And that's why the macronutrients are so important, because if you see 0 calories per serving, but you see 4 grams of carbs, you can bet that there are calories in it. So obviously in that one serving, not a big deal at all. It's not going to make any difference. But if you're doing tons and tons and tons of that stuff, that's where it starts to add up.
Well, and I think that's the important thing to be aware of with food labels is, to be honest, the way food labels are set up are just for the company to be able to mark a box that they're following, you know, regulations and guidelines set by the government. They're not putting these things together with the consumer's health as the focus. And so you really need to be your own advocate and make sure that you understand everything that's on the food label and understand how it applies to your health and your life. Because like Kyle said, if they're trying to get their numbers to look a certain way to fall into a certain category or to get by a certain regulation or guideline,
market things a certain way.
They can pretty much put whatever serving size they want to make the calories and macros fit what they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And that's just all, you know, legal and political on their side.
Well, and that's where you'll see these things that, and I don't have a great example off the top of my head, but you'll see something that you know is definitely a single serving that you would eat in one serving.
And they'll tell you it has 2 servings.
It's got 4 servings in it. And you're like, what? Like, there's no way. Like, who would eat a quarter of this thing and then put it back? Like, so that kind of stuff you really have to pay attention to.
Exactly. Because they're trying to make their numbers look better on paper. But
then you
it's not always realistic.
Then you can put that calorie count on the front of the package.
Yeah.
Until you turn it around, you're like, what is this?
Wait a second.
So yeah, new food labels. Some of them are already out. Some are still coming. But just more information is on the way. Mm-hmm. So story number 2, potential new cause for type 2 diabetes from some different research going on. So there's a number of caveats to it. It's not a perfect study, but it does highlight some kind of interesting connections. And so what happened was this study was taking place on a couple different groups of individuals. They had a healthy group, so a person with normal blood sugars, a pre-diabetic group, so people in that pre-diabetic range, and then actual type 2 diabetic group participate in this study. And each of these people was fed a McDonald's breakfast. So the McDonald's breakfast consisted of an Egg McMuffin, 2 hash browns, a glass of orange juice, and a McCafe hot chocolate.
So lots of carbs and lots of fats is basically what they were trying to get in this meal.
Right. So lots of carbs, lots of fats, and they were trying to see if one high carb, high fat, high calorie meal contributed to any sort of insulin resistance. And what they found was actually pretty interesting, that this meal in all groups, so healthy, pre-diabetic, and diabetic, actually there were enzymes that are released in the stomach that are supposed to digest proteins and whatnot in the stomach that were also passing into the small intestine. And those enzymes actually continued to dissolve the insulin receptors on cells in the bloodstream. And insulin receptors are what's required for insulin uptake and your insulin sensitivity. So thereby increasing insulin resistance through this new pathway of gut permeability.
So type 2 diabetes is based on the fact that your body has become resistant to insulin,
right? Meaning
blood sugar from your bloodstream cannot make it into the cells to give you energy and fuel your cells.
Mm-hmm.
So what Kyle's saying is they showed that after eating this high-fat, high-carb, highly inflammatory meal, that digestive enzymes that are supposed to stay in your stomach, meant to break down food, were actually passing through the gut wall and dissolving those same insulin markers, or same insulin receptors.
Receptors, yeah.
So basically putting that person's body in a state to be more insulin resistant after just one meal.
Yeah.
Because the common thought has been that insulin resistance is something that builds over time from lots and lots and lots of poor choices.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing here is that it could be a matter of a few poor choices that can make a big difference in your health.
Yeah, so it's a much more acute change. And so over time, these people would go back to normal. One meal isn't going to make any difference.
And what they found was that the healthy people did return back to normal quicker than the unhealthy people. Kind of makes sense.
And so it's just an interesting connection there, because it still needs to be fleshed out. This is relatively new that they're looking into, because it could be, obviously we know chronic lifestyle affects and contributes mainly to type 2 diabetes, but there could also be some other triggers there. And so what this was bringing into question is whether or not cheat meals are more detrimental than we thought, and things of that nature. So again, there's not a whole lot to this that we can really look at from a large sample size or a long-term duration, but acute effect-wise, it's just an interesting thing that people are going to start looking into.
Well, I think it kind of points out the fact that eating crappy food is going to have a negative effect in the body. Like that is, we might not be able to make true ties to diabetes or to, some of these other very specific conditions. But what we can say out of this study is even one meal of crappy food is enough to cause a negative effect.
Yeah. Now, was it appreciable negative effect? Probably not. But it's still interesting nonetheless. Now, the one thing that they didn't look at is, do we get the same effect from a good quality, high carb, high fat, high calorie meal? And
that would be what I would personally want to see, because I want to know where that difference is.
Yeah. So
or what effect that has.
If we turned this into a grass-fed burger with like a bunch of potatoes and rice or whatever
whole
else,
foods,
and just like real foods that aren't coming through
lower
McDonald's,
inflammatory fats,
would it have the same effect? And that would be interesting. But.
Well, because the other thing that's interesting to me about this study is that these results do mimic other studies that have been done on, specifically looking at inflammatory fats and the effect that inflammatory fats have on gut permeability, but also on gluten and the effects gluten have on gut permeability.
That's true.
So it actually mimics, like, the different studies that I've read all kind of come down to these same conclusions, which to me...
Well, I imagine there's trans fats in McDonald's, isn't there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
I'm sure there is. And maybe...
I don't know if they've changed that or not.
Yeah, I mean, because the government does tightly regulate trans fats now. But again, that doesn't matter. I mean, you can have an inflammatory fat that's not a trans fat.
Right, but especially if those are in there, like that would obviously add to this
So
issue.
What I'm saying is it may not just be this whole blood sugar insulin issue. It could be the fat specifically. It could be the gluten specifically. It could be the carbs specifically. So, but regardless, it's interesting that enzymes are able to pass through the gut lining, because that's one thing that I wasn't aware of before.
Yeah.
That can happen.
So one true takeaway from this is don't eat McDonald's breakfast every morning. Would recommend it.
Please try not to. I mean, high quality foods are always going to be a great option, but this is important to know that even a couple bad, crappy meals can affect you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the research goes from here.
Yeah, definitely.
And so finally, the topic of smaller, more frequent meals on body composition, weight loss. Is it more effective? should you be eating 6 meals, 8 meals a day spread out? Because, that general rule of thought is if I increase my meal frequency, I'm going to keep my metabolism up higher, longer, and that'll allow me to see more effective fat loss.
Yeah. Well, and this was originally based on a study that was done years and years ago. I didn't look it up to read back up on it. But, I mean, this does come from a place just like any nutrition advice or nutrition myths, they all come from a true place.
Not all of them.
Well, okay. I shouldn't say that. But a lot of them come from like some part of it was true in a certain situation, and then it kind of snowballed and got watered down and turned into something that it's not.
I know what you're saying.
And I feel like this is one of those things because this is still a question that I get from clients of like, that whole eating small meals, 5 to 6 small meals a day should be better for fat loss, should be better for your metabolism, which I actually disagree with because, for one, it doesn't optimize your digestion, which is very, very important, especially with the increasing frequency of digestive issues with people today. Constantly eating throughout the day is not giving your body a chance to fully digest one meal or one snack. So you're just kind of throwing, partially digested food on top of other food on top of other food. And that can create a lot of symptoms for people. Not for everybody, but for some people. But then you also have the fact of, if I'm constantly making carbs available for my body to use for energy, then I'm not tapping into my fat stores as efficiently as I could be.
You're keeping blood sugar elevated for longer.
Yes.
And the other part of that we know is that metabolic rate is most closely tied to the volume of calories that you bring in at a time. So if you're just bringing in smaller meals, smaller amounts of calories more frequently, you're going to get small blips in metabolic rate through the day. Whereas if you've got larger meals, you're not going to have it as frequently, but you're going to have a relatively larger increase in metabolic rate to deal with those calories.
Yeah.
Because your body's going to adjust to whatever you're giving it. It's not going to just suddenly have this same massive metabolic spike that you would if you had a 1,500 calorie meal versus a 500 calorie meal. Just because you ate again, it's going to slow that process back down once you've worked through that food.
Yeah. So really, within one given day, eating small meals more frequently isn't drastically improving your metabolism or your capacity to burn fat, and may actually be working against you in some situations. So trying to eat small meals more frequently with the intention of losing weight, you're probably wasting your time. But if that's how you normally eat, it's not like the end of the world.
Yeah. So I would say number one, when it comes to meal frequency, I say is preference.
Yeah.
So if you prefer to eat a bunch of small meals through the day, I wouldn't worry about it. If you'd rather have a couple large meals, same thing. I wouldn't really worry about it. I wouldn't try to change your whole day around if there is a difference, we're talking 1% or less. You would never notice this.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to really harp on that. I would just figure out, what does your schedule look like? When does it make sense for you to eat?
Focus on the foods that you're getting in the natural, normal times that you're eating first before you worry about changing up your
And I would avoid
amount of meals.
Major gaps between lunch and dinner. If you're doing a 12 o'clock lunch and a 7 p.m. dinner and you're trying to train in the middle of that time, I would probably throw some other calories in there somewhere. And that's more from a performance standpoint and an energy standpoint. But again, your body can adapt to a number of different feeding times. And at the end of the day, if it's something that makes your life easier, that's what you should stick with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think we talk about this all the time. It's consistency. It's having a normal schedule for your body on a daily basis. But I think for a lot of people, trying to fit in 6 small meals a day is tough and a little bit unrealistic.
Right.
So if that's your fear, don't be afraid of that. You're not missing out on some amazing fat burning potential.
Yeah, so if you're going from 3 meals a day to 6 or 7 meals a day, and you've been steady with your weight, or maybe you're losing 1 pound a week, you're not suddenly going to start losing 3 pounds a week.
No.
It's not going to change.
No. Well, and I honestly think in that situation too, that creates a different problem, because people who are trying to transition from 2 or 3 larger meals a day to 6 or 7 smaller meals, you're not getting the same amount of volume per meal. So you might actually end up feeling hungrier and less satisfied.
You'll feel less satisfied.
And that doesn't put you in a great place because then you're going to end up overeating in one of those meals.
And then you'll just kind of feel hungry all day long.
Constantly, yeah. So you want to be able to eat meals that are going to leave you full and satisfied, and then, set up your meals accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
So no major plus or minus there. It's really preference.
No, it's really preference. And I would say, like I said, digestively, you probably want to look for less meals.
Yeah, those just longer fasted windows.
Longer fasted windows. And sometimes for fat loss, longer fasted windows can be good too, but we're not talking like 7, 8, 9, 10 hours in the middle of the day.
Right.
So you still want to be able to fuel your body appropriately.
Yeah, I would keep the fasts to the beginning or the end of the day, not the middle.
Yeah. So, your body burns through a meal anywhere between 3 and 5 hours. So it takes your body about 3 to 5 hours to digest the bulk of a meal. Which is typically when you should set up your next meal or snack, if it makes sense for you.
Yep.
So that's what Kyle's saying between, if you have lunch at 12 and dinner at 7, you're probably going to start losing energy and feeling pretty sluggish right in the middle of that time. Yeah. So that's when you might want to eat something extra. And it's more for the purposes of energy and keeping your body fueled consistently.
Right. Especially if that's your workout time.
Yeah. Versus, improving your metabolism during the day.
Yeah. That's not going to have much effect there.
No. I think that's all I got on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any topics you want us to chat about, you can reach out to me at therootedrd.com, or you can reach out to Kyle at hypertrofit.com. But we will see you guys next week.
See you next week.
Oh.